10 years ago. I've been working with homeless people for about 25 years. I came to Boston in 1985 and didn't really know anything about homelessness, but I started talking to people on the street when they would ask me for money. And it turned out that they were veterans and they were homeless because they were traumatized from war. Some of them were World War II, but mostly they were Vietnam. And I had gotten kicked out of college in 1966 and drafted and sent to Vietnam. And I'm always convinced that if I had not had the support that I had from my family and friends, I would have been on the street just like these guys. So I got angry and I started doing volunteer work, first for the city of Cambridge, and then they asked me to go to work for them in 1986. And I worked for another nonprofit in Cambridge before I came to the Somerville Homeless Coalition 11 years ago.
So how has that work that you had done previously helped impact what you do in Somerville?
Well, I think that particularly, I have a very soft spot in my heart for homeless veterans because of my own experience. And unfortunately, now we're seeing guys and women who have been in Iraq and Afghanistan who are coming back and becoming homeless as well. We've got a lot of vets in our permanent housing program, and they're wonderful tenants. And, some of these are guys that were out on the street for 20 years and are so grateful to have a roof over their heads and are really doing very well in permanent housing. They just needed a chance.
Why is it that someone that is serving our country overseas comes back and doesn't have a place to live?
I ask myself the same question, Julie. I mean, I think it's one of the ironies, but it's worse than an irony. To me, it's criminal that we don't have the resources to take care of veterans. If you look at the suicide number of veterans on a daily basis, it's staggering. I know that more veterans died after coming home from Vietnam than died in Vietnam, died of substance abuse and suicide. So, it's about 55,000 Americans died in Vietnam. More than that number have died since coming home because they were so traumatized by the experience. And the VA is actually, and they've got this wonderful new Secretary, General Sezeki, who has made a commitment to ending veteran homelessness in 5 years. But again, it's a daunting task because the federal government, doesn't have enough resources to do the job. And, it's like we work in Somerville, which is an incredibly supportive town. I mean, we've got a mayor that values what we do and is very supportive of our work. But, Somerville financially does not have enough resources to solve the problem. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts doesn't have the resources. I think it's only the federal government that's going to have the deep enough resources to solve problems like hunger and homelessness in our society. But if you look at what's happening now, in Congress, they're talking about cutting programs that support poor people living in housing, things like fuel assistance. If you cut out those federal programs, you're going to make more people homeless. And again, we don't have enough resources to help the people who are homeless now. Almost 25% of the children in our country are dependent upon food stamps because they don't have enough money, to buy the food that they need. And the same thing happens at the VA where these guys come home and for my generation in Vietnam, it often took, I knew guys that came home and got married and bought houses and had good jobs and were fine for 20 years and then everything fell apart. The thing about these guys is because there's no draft now, the soldiers today are having to go back to the conflict 3, 4, sometimes 5 times. And there's no way that they're not going to be messed up from the terrible experiences that they're having in a war. And the VA just does not have resources to support everybody when they come back.
So really, the homelessness with the vets is almost like a reaction to going and serving in war.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a generalization, Julie, but if there's a common denominator, one of the reasons that people become homeless is that they've been abused and neglected their whole lives. We all have crisis in our lives, but most of us have family and friends that can help us get through those crises. So these are folks, for whatever reason, may have burned their bridges, but they're traumatized. It's like the incidence of domestic violence among homeless women, is staggering. And people, it's like nobody really chooses to become homeless, right? It's not easy.
Sure.
It's not fun. but something has driven them to it, whether it's substance abuse or a mental illness. But where did those things come from? So if you look at the population generally, that these are folks who are traumatized, and that's what happens to soldiers in war. It's a very traumatic experience, and if you can't get the help you need when you come home, chances are that you're going to suffer, and unfortunately, the consequences may be things like homelessness because you just can't deal with society.
We're chatting with Mark Alston Follansbee. He is the executive director for the Somerville Homeless Coalition. Mark, how can we clear up some of those stereotypes and biases of what the general public has towards homelessness?
Well, I think the wonderful thing these days, Julie, that was different from Vietnam was that the soldiers are not looked at, as the guilty party. I think that people are really welcoming soldiers home and trying to help them. I mean, I wish that we paid a little more attention to trying to talk to our government about what its priorities are. But I think that, these are all folks, they all have some family someplace. They all came from somebody. And for whatever reason, they're cut off. People ask me whether, they should, give some spare change when they pass somebody on the street. And I always say I don't think that there's any right or wrong answer to it. Sometimes I give money and sometimes I don't. But I always try just to connect with a person and say hello and ask them how they're doing so that they don't feel so cut off, from us as a society. I mean, I grew up in a time when I think it was much easier for people to look out for each other, to have that real sense of community. And I think because of the way we live these days, we've lost that to a certain extent. And I think we all lose something when we have people in our, midst who are suffering. So I think just reaching out to folks and saying hello, buy somebody a sandwich, get involved. I think that everybody can do things like volunteer a little bit of time. The United Way is a great resource if you're looking for a volunteer opportunity. But, please call the Somerville Homeless Coalition if you want to find out more about what we do or if you'd like to volunteer with us. We need all the help we can get, even though we've grown from a small organization with 2 staff to now one with 35. We still depend upon volunteers to help us do the work, and I think especially to give the people that we work with that, little touch of humanity. We just had our Thanksgiving dinner on the 16th for all of the folks that we work with in Somerville, and it's exciting. We've got the Rotary Club comes and serves the dinner, and we've got other volunteers from the community that come, but it's really a community outpouring just to show people that we care. And I think that that's probably where we have to start. I also would just urge people to look at our values as a society, because I think, we know that we've spent over $1 trillion on war in the last 10 years. And, I just keep going back to that figure of 25% of the children in the country depending upon food stamps. I mean, what are our values that allow this to happen? And what do we have to do to get people elected to Congress and to the presidency that will talk about the issues that poor people are having to face on a daily basis and work to change some of this? And we know how to solve these problems. We've got the experience. We just don't have enough resources to do it.
And the thing is, too, you mentioned a lot about the children relying on food stamps. That impacts everything that goes into a child's daily routine. I mean, if they can't get the basic needs that they need to survive, then they can't even go to school and try to learn something. That's
right, Julie. And especially true for homeless children. We know that incidents of asthma are much greater in homeless children. The average homeless child has to go to more than one shelter during the course of a year, and that often means changing their school system. We know that every time a child changes their school, they're set back about 4 months in their learning. So, this is a setup for disaster if we don't give these kids what they really need.
And sometimes the only thing that they're getting is that teacher or school connection. And if that's taken away from them, then it just spirals the whole thing again.
Good point. It's very true. Hopefully that there are lots of people in the community that they're able to connect with them and pick them out, and pick them up. But it is very difficult. Imagine, struggling to try to make ends meet and just trying to get your kids off to school with, some food in their belly. So teachers and everybody else that connects with them is really important to try to help